The valley shimmered in the tender blush of dawn, the sun painting the tents of Israel with gold. From every corner of the camp came the sound of preparation, the sharpening of blades, the rustle of armor, the low murmur of prayer. Joshua stood at the front lines, his heart steady beneath the weight of destiny. Before him, across the wide plain, 5 mighty kings had united their armies into a sea of spears and banners. The air thrummed with coming war. Yet Joshua did not tremble. He remembered the voice of the Lord, clear, commanding, filled with promise. God had said, "Do not be afraid. I have given them into your hand." Joshua lifted his eyes to the sky, the same sky that would soon hold a miracle, and whispered, "The Lord fights for Israel." Behind him, an entire nation waited for his word, and the sun itself seemed to pause, listening. The air exploded with the sound of battle. Joshua's command echoed through the valley as swords clashed and shields rang like thunder. The armies met in a storm of motion and dust, yet Israel's strength did not falter. Each man fought with a fire that was not his own. Joshua's faith pulsed through the ranks like light. Across the field, the 5 kings' soldiers began to waver, their cries of defiance turning into fear. Then the heavens roared. Hailstones larger than fists hurtled from a clear sky, striking only the enemy. The soldiers of Israel gazed upward in awe as the storm fought beside them. Joshua felt it deep in his spirit. This was God's battle, not his. The battle raged across the valley like fire in dry grass. Dust and thunder mixed with shouts of faith and fear. Joshua moved through the chaos like a flame guided by purpose. Every swing of his sword carried the strength of a promise. The sun burned high, the day stretching long, yet the enemy began to break. Their captains shouted in panic as hail continued to fall, sharp as stones of light. Joshua looked to the horizon where the 5 kings fled toward the hills, their banners torn. He knew that if the night came, their escape would mean defeat. Raising his eyes to the glowing sky, Joshua's heart trembled with holy daring. He whispered, "O Lord, let the sun stand still over Gibeon, and the moon over the valley of Ajalon." Silence fell across the earth, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The world seemed to freeze. The clamor of battle dimmed into a strange stillness as sunlight hung suspended above the valley. Shadows no longer crept across the ground. Warriors lifted their eyes in disbelief, their breath catching as time itself obeyed the voice of faith. Joshua lowered his sword, his heart overwhelmed with awe. Across the hills, the 5 kings' armies faltered, trapped beneath a sky that refused to turn. The Israelites advanced, strength renewed as the hours of daylight stretched by divine command. The impossible had become real. Heaven had heard, and time had bowed to the prayer of a man who trusted God completely. A roar of triumph swept through Israel's ranks. The soldiers surged forward, their courage multiplied by wonder. The enemy fled in terror, for the God of heaven had turned the sun into a soldier for his people. Joshua pressed onward, his voice steady and clear, guiding his men through the valley and into victory. The golden light lingered upon their faces, each one touched by the miracle they had witnessed. Above them, the still sun burned like a crown of glory. And though the battle was fierce, every heart knew that it was not strength of arms, but the power of faith that had stopped time in the sky. The sun blazed, unmoving above the land as Joshua led his warriors through the hills of Gibeon. The ground trembled beneath the stamp of thousands of feet. Every rock and ravine echoed with the rhythm of pursuit. The 5 kings, men who had once mocked Israel's God, fled through the wilderness, their armor battered, their pride broken. Joshua pressed on, his voice calling his men to courage. "Do not stop. The Lord has delivered them into our hands." Even the air shimmered with divine power, as though heaven itself urged them forward. The soldiers, breathless and dust-covered, felt no weariness beneath the eternal sunlight. The miracle that held the sky still now filled their hearts with boundless strength. At the mouth of a great cave near Mecca, the 5 kings stumbled inside, gasping for breath. Their crowns glinted faintly in the dimness as they hid among the shadows. Joshua arrived moments later, eyes fixed on the cave's dark opening. He raised his hand, signaling to his captains. "Roll great stones against the mouth of the cave," he commanded, "and guard it well." The men obeyed swiftly, sealing the kings inside. The rest of the army pressed on, chasing the scattered remnants of their foes. The valley echoed with victory cries and the clatter of pursuit, while inside the cave, silence hung like a sentence waiting to be spoken. The battle swept onward through the open fields. The enemy fled in all directions, but nowhere could they escape the brightness of the unsetting sun. Joshua's soldiers struck down their foes until none dared to lift a sword against them. In every direction, the victory was complete. Yet Joshua's heart remained focused on the kings hidden in the cave. He knew that this day was not merely a triumph of battle. It was a message from God to every heart that doubted his power. The same God who stopped the sun would soon reveal his justice to the nations. When the last of the battle was won, Joshua turned his gaze back toward the cave. The sun still burned steady above, refusing to set. The air shimmered with holy calm. Joshua called his captains and spoke with quiet authority. "Bring the kings out." The guards rolled away the stones, and one by one the 5 kings emerged. Silent, trembling beneath the unchanging light. Their jeweled crowns no longer shone with pride, but with the fading glint of surrender. Joshua looked upon them, not with cruelty, but with the weight of God's justice resting in his eyes. As the kings stood before Joshua, the warriors of Israel gathered in a vast circle around them. The silence was deep, filled only by the whisper of wind across the stones. Joshua spoke to his men. "See what the Lord has done. No power can stand against his promise." He turned to the captains beside him. "Place your feet on the necks of these kings," he said. "For the Lord your God will do the same to all who rise against you." The captains obeyed, their faces radiant with awe, not pride. The moment was not of cruelty but of faith, a living reminder that victory belonged to God alone. The sunlight blazed on, steady and eternal, as heaven and earth watched the fulfillment of divine power. The golden light of the unsetting sun wrapped the valley in silence. The 5 kings stood trembling before Joshua, their jeweled crowns glinting faintly in the dust. All around, the soldiers of Israel waited, faces solemn beneath the everlasting day. Joshua's voice broke the stillness, calm and strong as thunder carried on the wind. "This is the Lord's doing," he said. "He alone gives victory." The kings had waged war against the people of God, and now they stood as living proof that no strength could stand before heaven's hand. Joshua raised his sword, not in pride, but in obedience, and the people knew that this moment would be remembered for generations. The battle had ended, but the glory of God had only begun to rise. Joshua turned to his captains, his gaze steady and filled with conviction. "Do not be afraid or discouraged," he said. "Be strong and courageous, for the Lord will do to all your enemies what you have seen today." The men's eyes shone with renewed faith. In that moment, they understood. Their victory was not just of swords, but of trust. The sun's stillness above them was a covenant, a sign that heaven fought beside those who believed. The mountains glowed with unending light, and the hearts of Israel burned with holy fire. Even the wind seemed to whisper the same truth. God's promises never fail. When Joshua had spoken, the air stirred softly, carrying the scent of dust and victory. He stepped forward, his shadow stretching long across the ground. With solemn reverence, he brought justice upon the kings, not in vengeance but in obedience to the Lord's command. The soldiers bowed their heads, understanding that this was not a man's triumph, but God's fulfillment. When it was finished, Joshua gave orders that the kings be hung upon trees until evening, as a sign that evil had no power under heaven's gaze. And though the sight was grim, the people felt peace. For justice and mercy had met beneath the steadfast sun. As the evening hour drew near, Joshua commanded the bodies to be taken down. The men obeyed, carrying them to the cave, where the kings had once hidden. There, in the same darkness that had sheltered their fear, they were laid to rest. Large stones were rolled once more before the cave's mouth, sealing it forever. The soldiers stood watching as the last stone thudded into place, the sound echoing across the hills, like the closing of a chapter. The sun still shone above them, strong and steadfast, bearing witness to a day that heaven had stretched for God's glory. When the work was done, Joshua lifted his eyes to the heavens. The light of the everlasting sun filled the sky with warmth and wonder. Around him, the soldiers stood silent, their faces reflecting both exhaustion and peace. Joshua's voice rose once more in prayer, not for victory, but for gratitude. "O Lord," he said softly, "you have fought for Israel. You have kept your promise." The sun seemed to shimmer brighter, as if heaven smiled upon his words. And then, as slowly as the turning of a dream, the light began to fade. The sun, obedient once more, resumed its journey across the sky. The miracle had ended, but its memory would never die. The next morning, a quiet peace rested over the land of Gibeon. The sky, now moving once again, shimmered with soft gold and pale blue. Joshua gathered the tribes of Israel before the Ark of the Covenant. Their faces still glowed with awe, their hearts heavy with gratitude. He spoke to them, his voice deep and steady. "Remember this day. The Lord has shown that he is faithful and mighty. He fought for us and stopped the sun in the heavens." The people bowed their heads, tears glistening in the morning light. Around them, the once scorched valley now lay calm, washed clean by the miracle of God's power. Joshua knew that this victory was not the end. It was a beginning, a call to trust the Lord forever. As the people stood in reverent silence, Joshua called the elders and captains forward. "This is the covenant of courage," he said. "The same God who stopped the sun will go before us in every battle to come." He lifted a stone from the ground, smooth and white, and set it upright beneath a great oak. "This stone shall be a witness," he declared, "for it has heard all the words the Lord has spoken to us today." The people's voices rose together in promise, their hearts burning with renewed strength. They had seen the power of heaven, and they would never again doubt the one who ruled both earth and sky. The sun climbed higher, soft and warm now, no longer fierce or unyielding. Joshua walked among the people, speaking to them gently, reminding them of the Lord's faithfulness from Egypt to Jericho to this very day. He told them that courage was not the absence of fear, but the presence of trust. The soldiers listened intently, their battle-worn faces softening with understanding. They had seen giants fall, walls crumble, and the heavens stand still, each miracle a step in their journey of faith. The children of Israel lifted their eyes to the hills, their hearts swelling with hope. God had proven that no day was too long for his power, and no promise too great for his keeping. As midday approached, Joshua climbed a rocky rise overlooking the camp. From there, he saw the endless plain where the sun had once stood still. The silence of that miracle echoed in his heart. He knelt upon the rock and prayed, "Lord, teach us to trust you in every moment. You hold the heavens in your hands. Hold also our hearts." A soft wind moved through the valley, as if in answer. The people below saw their leader kneeling, and followed his example, falling to their knees in worship. Across the land, voices rose like the sound of rushing water, a nation giving thanks to the God who commands both time and light. As the day waned, Joshua stood before the people once more. "The Lord is with us," he declared, "and his light will never fade." The people shouted in joy, their voices echoing across the hills. Laughter and music filled the camp as families gathered around evening fires. The sky deepened into orange and rose, the first stars peeking through the fading light. For the first time since the miracle, the sun dipped peacefully beyond the horizon. Joshua watched it go, his heart filled with quiet wonder. Though the day of battle had passed, the day of faith would never end. God had written his glory across the sky, and now, upon their hearts, night settled over the valley, calm and deep. The fires of Israel flickered like scattered stars upon the earth. The people gathered close, their faces glowing in the warmth of victory and peace. Joshua sat near the largest fire, the flicker of light dancing in his eyes. Around him, children leaned forward, eager to hear the story of the day heaven stopped. He spoke softly, his voice rich with wonder. When the sun stood still, he said, "It was not for our strength, but for God's glory. He made the day longer so his promise could shine brighter." The children's eyes widened, their hearts capturing the miracle in silence. Beyond them, the stars shimmered, heaven listening still. As Joshua spoke, the fire crackled, and the night seemed to draw closer, wrapping the camp in sacred quiet. He told them how the Lord had hurled hailstones from the heavens and held the sun unmoving in its course. "God heard our cry," Joshua said, "because we trusted him completely." One of the children whispered, "Will he listen to us too?" Joshua smiled, his eyes soft. "Yes," he said, "he listens to every heart that believes." Around the fire, fathers nodded, mothers held their children close, and faith passed from one generation to the next beneath the watching stars. Far from the fires, on a quiet hill, a group of soldiers stood watch. The fields below shimmered under moonlight, silvering the land that had once blazed with day. They whispered of what they had seen: the frozen sun, the still air, the thunder of God's power. Some smiled in disbelief, others wept softly, remembering how they had felt no fear. "It was as if time itself obeyed his command," one said. Their hearts were full, their spirits forever changed. No battle, no darkness could ever erase what they had witnessed when the heavens bowed to faith. In another part of camp, the elders gathered near the ark. The glow of oil lamps flickered across their weathered faces. One of them, a gray-bearded man, lifted his hands toward heaven. "This miracle," he said, "will be remembered by our children's children. The day the Son obeyed the Lord's command will forever remind us that nothing is too great for his hand." Joshua approached, standing among them. "Then let us write it down," he said. "Let this story live beyond this night." So the scribes began to record the day when heaven and earth stood still together. As midnight deepened, Joshua stepped away from the camp and looked toward the horizon. The stars stretched endlessly, and the moon glowed pale and soft. He whispered a final prayer. "Lord, you stopped the sun for us. Now stop our hearts from wandering from you." His words drifted into the night like music carried by the wind. Behind him, the camp rested in peace. The people of Israel sleeping beneath a sky that had once paused for their faith. The miracle was over, but its memory burned eternal in the hearts of those who believed. Orgsh, he nus. Shao. The dawn after the miracle came gently, golden and tender, spilling light over the hills of Israel. Children ran through the fields laughing, their voices rising like songbirds in the morning breeze. The adults stood watching, remembering how the same sun had once stood still at Joshua's command. Joshua himself walked among the people, his steps slow and thoughtful. Every sunrise now felt like a message from God, a reminder that even the heavens obeyed his word. He gathered the youngest among them and said, "Tell your children after you that the Lord stopped the sun so his people would know his power and his love." The little ones nodded, their eyes bright with wonder. already carrying the story in their hearts. Later that day, Joshua called together the elders and teachers of Israel. They sat beneath the same great oak that shaded the stone of covenant. "The Lord has given us this land," Joshua said. "But more than land, He has given us faith. Teach the people never to forget the day when heaven paused for His promise." The elders nodded solemnly, and one replied, "We will tell the story to our children, and they will tell it to theirs." The circle of faith widened that day, linking past to future, miracle to memory. The light of God's power had become a legacy, shining in the hearts of His people. As the years passed, the story of the sun that stood still spread through every tribe. Around campfires, fathers told their sons how God had fought beside them. Mothers sang soft songs about the day when time itself bowed to faith. And in the hearts of the children, the tale became a light that never faded. Joshua often watched them play, chasing each other beneath the endless sky, their laughter echoing where once battle cries had thundered. He smiled, knowing that the truest victory was not won by sword or stone, but by the faith that would live on long after his voice was gone. One evening, Joshua sat alone by the edge of the Jordan River. The water shimmered with the last hues of sunset, red, gold, and violet dancing upon its surface. He thought of all the wonders the Lord had done, the walls of Jericho falling, the sun frozen in the sky, the people safe and free. "You have been faithful," Joshua whispered. "From the desert to this promised land, you have never failed us." He took a small stone from the riverbank and placed it in his pouch, a quiet remembrance of the God who kept His promises through every generation. As night fell, Joshua looked up once more at the stars that now moved in their courses. Each spark of light above seemed to whisper of that great day when time stood still. He smiled, knowing that faith had not only conquered an army, but had written the glory of God across the sky. "The sun stood still," he murmured. "But the story will move forever." The wind stirred through the trees, carrying His words through the valley. And as the people of Israel slept, the stars shimmered like eternal witnesses to the promise that faith can do the impossible. Many seasons passed, and Joshua grew older, his hair silvered like the morning mist upon the hills. Yet his spirit remained as bright as the day the sun had stood still. The people still looked to him as a father and a guide. One evening, as the horizon glowed in crimson light, Joshua called the tribes together at Shechem. He stood before them beside the Ark of the Covenant, the same symbol of God's presence that had gone before them in every battle. His voice carried across the crowd. "You have seen all that the Lord has done. Not one of His promises has failed." The people listened, their hearts filled with reverence. Joshua's gaze lifted to the sky that once obeyed his faith, and he smiled. "Serve Him faithfully," he said, "for He has made the heavens stand still to show you His love." As the people stood before him, Joshua's captains and elders stepped forward. "We will serve the Lord," they declared, "for He is our God." Their voices rose together, echoing like the wind through olive trees. Joshua looked upon them with pride and joy. "Then remember," he said, "the covenant made beneath the unsetting sun. Teach your children to trust the Lord who commands both light and time." He lifted his hands toward heaven, and for a moment, the light of the setting sun seemed to pause upon his face, gentle, eternal, and full of peace. After the gathering, Joshua sat quietly by his tent. The camp was calm, the air filled with the soft hum of evening. He looked upon the faces of the people, once weary wanderers, now a strong and peaceful nation. His heart swelled with gratitude. He remembered the first time he had heard God's promise, "Be strong and courageous." Those words had guided him through every valley, every victory. He smiled, whispering, "The same God who stopped the sun will keep His light shining in their hearts." The stars above began to appear, steady and bright, as if standing guard over the promise that faith would never fade. In the final days of his life, Joshua called the young men of Israel to him. They gathered close, kneeling at his feet as he spoke. "Do not fear the days ahead," he said softly. "The Lord, who stopped the sun, will never leave you. His power is not only in the heavens, it is in every heart that believes." He placed his hands upon their heads, blessing them one by one. "Go forth," he said, "and let your faith shine brighter than the sun that once stood still." His words settled deep within them, a torch passed from one generation to the next. When Joshua's time came to rest, the sun rose, as it always had, faithful and bright. The people of Israel mourned him with songs of gratitude, not sorrow. They buried him in the land he had fought for, beneath a sky that once stopped for his faith. As years turned to centuries, the story of the sun that stood still was told again and again, carried by every firelight and every sunrise. And though generations passed, the message never dimmed. When faith stands firm, even time itself will bow before God's power. The heavens moved on, but the legacy of Joshua's prayer shone forever, an eternal promise carved across the sky.